Clara lived a life woven with quiet dreams and the fierce love she held for her son, Ben. At 34, she was raising Ben, a bright-eyed 10-year-old, on her own. His father had left 6 years ago, and since then, their world, though often challenging, had been a tapestry of two hearts beating as one. Clara's own childhood, spent in the imposing home of her parents, Eleanor and Richard Thorne, was a tangled knot of complicated feelings. Nothing, not even the years of subtle disapproval, could have prepared her for the Thanksgiving that unraveled everything. Ben, her sensitive boy, was already feeling the sting of unkind words from school bullies. The Thorne household, with its grand colonial facade in the town of Willow Creek, was a monument to appearances. Eleanor and Richard lived for the gaze of others, their lives a meticulously arranged display. The house gleamed, ever ready for Richard's business partners or Eleanor's social set. Clara and her sister, Sarah, were expected to be perfect reflections of this carefully polished image. Clara, however, was a dreamer, her spirit drawn to stories and the whispering creek behind their house, while Sarah shone in every conventional pursuit. Her parents saw Clara's nature not as something to be cherished, but as a flaw to be mended. Her mother would often murmur sharp criticisms at family gatherings, wishing Clara were more like her sister. Then came David, a breath of fresh air in college. He was everything her parents were not: warm, accepting, truly interested in Clara, not a sculpted version of her. They married young, defying her parents' wishes, and 2 years later, Ben arrived, a bundle of curious wonder. Their early years together were filled with a quiet joy. But a shadow fell when David lost his job. The weight of providing for his family seemed to crush him, and his absences grew longer, their arguments sharper. When Ben was 4, David left, moving across the country for a job opportunity. The divorce was swift, and his visits dwindled, then stopped entirely by the time Ben turned 7. Ben had inherited Clara's gentle soul and artistic spark. At 10, he was a slender boy with a mop of sandy hair that tumbled into his eyes and a constellation of freckles scattered across his nose. Unlike many boys his age who chased balls and lived for sports, Ben found solace and excitement in art and science. He could spend hours lost in the intricate world of models or sketching fantastical robots from spare parts. The financial strain in their Boston apartment became too much, and Clara made the difficult decision to return to Willow Creek. A teaching job at the local elementary school offered stability, and despite her deep reservations about being so close to her parents, she hoped the presence of family might benefit Ben. Her mother had spoken of Ben needing a male influence and criticized Clara's parenting decisions. The first year back was harder than Clara had imagined. Ben struggled to find his place in a new school. His love for robotics and art made him an easy target for some of the more boisterous boys in his class. He often came home with eyes red-rimmed, trying to hide his tears from her. He once asked his mother why he did not like the things other boys liked, to which she lovingly told him he was extraordinary and that the world needed dreamers like him. Sarah, Clara's sister, had walked the path her parents had laid out with effortless grace. She married Thomas, a successful surgeon, and their 2 children were paragons of achievement. Chloe, 12, was already a rising star in gymnastics, and Daniel, 14, excelled both academically and as the quarterback of the junior varsity football team. Sarah never missed an opportunity to highlight her children's triumphs, often subtly drawing comparisons to Ben, emphasizing the importance of sports for boys. These interactions, combined with her parents' constant critiques of her parenting, brewed a storm of anxiety within Clara as Thanksgiving approached. The annual Thanksgiving dinner at her parents' home was less a celebration and more a grand performance for the extended Thorne family. Clara offered Ben an escape, but he wished to attend, wanting to see Uncle John and hoping for his grandparents' approval, a yearning Clara understood well. The night before Thanksgiving, Ben worked late, perfecting a small robot Uncle John had given him for his birthday. He beamed with pride as he showed it to Clara, hoping his grandpa would like it. Thanksgiving Day dawned with an unusual warmth for late November. Ben wore his best clothes and allowed Clara to style his hair. The small robot, nestled in a shoebox, was a treasured cargo. As they stood on her parents' doorstep, Clara's familiar anxiety tightened. Eleanor greeted them, her appearance perfect, but her words were a critical assessment of Clara's simple dress and Ben's thin frame. The house was steeped in the rich aromas of Thanksgiving. Family members were already gathered in the living room. Aunt Carol, unlike Eleanor, greeted them with genuine warmth. Uncle John, Richard's brother and the family eccentric, winked at Ben, calling him the young inventor. Sarah air-kissed Clara's cheek, making a subtle jab about her rest. Thomas offered a distracted handshake. Their children, Chloe and Daniel, showcased their achievements to Richard. Richard acknowledged Ben, but quickly shifted the focus to Daniel's football success, causing Ben's face to fall slightly. Clara guided Ben to the appetizer table, trying to lift his spirits. The initial small talk continued, each conversation a delicate dance around hidden barbs or subtle criticisms. Eleanor questioned Clara's job security. Sarah wondered why Clara had not pursued dating. Only Uncle John showed genuine interest, asking Ben about his robot projects. When dinner was announced, the seating arrangement made Clara's heart sink, separating her from Ben. Richard announced his gratitude for family, subtly criticizing Clara's unconventional choices. Dinner began with Eleanor's interrogation of everyone's lives, then turned sharply to Clara's finances. Clara affirmed their well-being, but Eleanor expressed distaste for their apartment. Ben tried to join the conversation, but was repeatedly ignored, pushing food around his plate. When Daniel boasted about intimidating a smaller boy, Uncle John interjected, but Richard dismissed it as healthy competitive spirit. Ben quietly disagreed, which Richard dismissed due to Ben's lack of sports experience. The tension was palpable and Clara saw hurt in Ben's brave face. Uncle John tried to change the subject, asking Ben about his robot. Ben's eyes lit up at Uncle John's invitation. He gained confidence as he described his programmable robot, explaining its features and how he built and programmed it himself. He reached for the shoebox, carefully placing his creation on the table. The robot, about the size of a small toaster, had several creative modifications Ben had added. Its LED lights blinked as he switched it on. He explained its sensors and modified gripping mechanism. For a moment, the table was attentive, and Ben's face glowed with pride as he demonstrated the robot. Then Richard snorted, mocking Ben's creation with exaggerated movements and a high-pitched voice. Eleanor laughed first, followed by Sarah, Thomas, and Daniel. Eleanor criticized Clara for not encouraging Ben in something more practical, saying his sensitivity would not serve him well in the real world. Ben's hands trembled, his face turning a deep red flush. Richard declared that Ben was just a kid who needed to toughen up. Clara sharply asserted Ben's right to pursue his interests without mockery. Sarah interjected, dismissing it as harmless teasing Ben needed to learn from. Ben's fork clattered, his eyes filling with tears of betrayal and hurt. Clara continued to defend Ben's dedication and creativity. Richard dramatically sighed, claiming Clara coddled Ben too much. Thomas, Sarah's husband, added that boys were not being raised right and that single mothers could not provide the necessary discipline and male influence. The table fell silent. Ben's hands flattened on the table, his shoulders rigid. His expression shifted from hurt to determination. Slowly, deliberately, Ben stood up. He announced clearly that he would never forget what was said, how they laughed, or how it made him feel. The table went completely silent. Richard's mocking smile froze. Eleanor's eyes widened. Daniel stopped snickering. Richard began to speak, but Ben had already carefully placed his robot back in its box and left the dining room. Clara immediately stood up, confronting her parents for humiliating their grandson. Eleanor dismissed it as family teasing, but Uncle John spoke up, calling it cruelty. Clara stated she would check on Ben, and then they were leaving. Eleanor hissed protests, but Clara was firm. Richard commanded her not to return if she left, but Clara saw it as the healthiest choice for Ben and herself. She found Ben on the front porch, hugging his robot box. Clara sat beside him, putting her arm around his shoulders. They sat in silence, the sounds of arguing voices drifting from inside. Clara apologized for how Ben was treated, but he replied it was not her fault and asked to go home. Clara agreed, promising they would never have to return. As they walked to the car, Uncle John emerged with their coats and a bag of pie. He gave Ben pie and praised his courage, telling Clara she was doing the right thing. As they drove away, silence filled the car, heavy with unspoken emotions. Ben stared out the window, clutching his robot. The drive felt endless. Clara watched him, searching for signs of his pain, but his face remained neutral. At their apartment building, Ben asked if his grandparents were right about him. Clara turned off the engine and faced him, assuring him there was nothing wrong with him. She told him his creativity, intelligence, and kindness were strengths. He questioned his grandfather's view of toughness, wondering if he should be more like Daniel. Clara asked if he truly admired someone who intimidated smaller kids. Ben slowly shook his head. Clara told him the world needed all kinds of people, artists, scientists, and dreamers. They went inside. Ben placed his robot on the coffee table, then collapsed on the couch, his sobs gut-wrenching. Clara held him, whispering it was okay to cry. When his sobs subsided, he revealed that his grandfather and Daniel had always made fun of him during their visits, especially when Clara was not there. The revelation hit Clara hard. She struggled to keep her voice steady, asking why he had not told her. He said he did not want her to be upset and hoped they would like him if he tried harder. Clara held him close, telling him he should not have to change to earn love. They talked late into the night, Ben sharing other painful memories. Each revelation fueled Clara's anger and resolve to protect him. Around midnight, Sarah texted, blaming Clara for ruining Thanksgiving and criticizing Ben's sensitivity. Clara turned off her phone. Sleep eluded her that night, replaying every visit, feeling the weight of her failure to protect him. Morning came after a restless night. Ben was already awake, adjusting his robot. He looked up, his expression serious, stating he did not want to go back to his grandparents' house. Clara assured him they did not have to. He asked if she was mad at them, and she responded with disappointment and anger at their treatment, and sadness that they could not see how amazing he was. Clara was pouring coffee when the doorbell rang. She knew it would be her father. Richard Thorne stood sternly, dressed impeccably. He stated the conflict had gone on long enough and expected Clara to bring Ben for dinner leftovers to smooth things over. There was no apology or acknowledgement of what happened. Clara firmly refused without a genuine apology to Ben and a commitment to respect him. Richard scoffed, calling it family fun and saying Ben needed to toughen up. Clara countered that it was humiliating for Ben and he deserved better. Richard insisted that family moved past these things. Clara stood firm, demanding real change. Suddenly, Ben appeared, clutching his robot. He quietly greeted his grandfather. Richard's expression softened slightly, and he invited Ben and Clara to dinner, mentioning pumpkin pie. Clara started to step in front of Ben, but he moved beside her. Ben quietly stated he did not want to return after what happened. Richard's eyebrows rose, surprised by the direct confrontation. He called it teasing, a way family showed love. Ben shook his head, stating it was not love and it hurt him when he and Daniel made fun of his interests. Richard insisted they were trying to help him become a strong man, saying the world was not kind to sensitive boys. Ben replied that perhaps the world should be kinder, and that his teachers praised the very things his grandfather mocked. Richard was momentarily speechless. Clara proudly placed a hand on Ben's shoulder. Richard then tried a different tactic, emphasizing family sticking together and not holding grudges. Ben thoughtfully explained he was not holding a grudge, but did not want to be around people who made him feel bad, reiterating his mother's words about not having to earn love. Richard's face reddened, accusing Clara of turning Ben against them. Clara countered that she was teaching him self-respect and boundaries, something she wished she had learned earlier. Richard scoffed, stating the Thorne family did not do boundaries and valued loyalty above all else. Ben asked if that loyalty extended even when it hurt someone. Richard stared at him, saying Ben did not understand adult matters and that the conversation was between him and Clara. Ben persisted, asking if he should have a say in how people treated him. The child's simple logic momentarily stumped Richard. His expression hardened again. Richard threatened Clara, demanding she bring Ben to dinner or they would both regret it, stating family loyalty was not optional. Clara felt a calm certainty. She affirmed her loyalty to Ben and herself, asserting they deserved respect and unconditional love. Richard asked if that was her final answer and Clara confirmed it. She stated they would not return until he truly accepted Ben for who he was. Richard coldly declared she had made her choice and should not expect financial or other help in the future, saying she was on her own. Clara softly replied that they always had been. Ben reached for her hand as she gently closed the door. The finality of the soft click echoed in their apartment. Ben asked if she was okay, and Clara knelt, telling him she was more than okay, proud of him and their choice for health over familiarity. When Ben asked what happened next, Clara smiled, saying they would make their own Thanksgiving traditions, just the two of them. Later that morning, as Clara made pancakes, her phone rang. It was Uncle John. He had heard about Richard's visit and checked on them. Clara admitted it was harder than expected to stand up to Richard. Uncle John, knowing his brother for 68 years, affirmed Clara's courage. Clara gave credit to Ben, but Uncle John said it was because she showed him how. Uncle John planned his own rebellion against the family, offering to bring Chinese food to Clara and Ben. For the first time since the disastrous dinner, Clara genuinely smiled, accepting his offer. Throughout the day, messages poured in from Eleanor and Sarah, alternating between guilt trips and veiled threats. Clara ignored them, focusing on creating a new day with Ben. They built a blanket fort, baked cookies, and watched movies. When Uncle John arrived with abundant Chinese food, they welcomed him. Uncle John toasted to new traditions, and Ben added a toast to being themselves. As Clara watched them laugh, a long-held pain in her chest began to loosen. She saw clearly that family was defined by respect, acceptance, and genuine love, and their small gathering of 3 was more of a family than her parents' grand house had ever been. The week following Thanksgiving unfolded in unexpected ways. Clara's phone continued to buzz with messages from family members, but she maintained her distance, needing time to process and determine the best path forward for Ben and herself. On Monday afternoon, she scheduled an appointment with Dr. Evelyn Reed, a family therapist recommended by the school counselor. Clara poured out the entire story in the warm, calming office. Dr. Reed explained the pattern of emotional dismissal in her family, affirming that breaking these patterns was possible, especially to protect her child. Clara admitted her hesitation about cutting them off completely, but Dr. Reed clarified that setting boundaries was about communicating what was acceptable treatment. Over the next hour, Dr. Reed helped Clara craft clear boundaries for her parents and sister. They scheduled another session, possibly including Ben. That evening, Ben's science teacher, Ms. Green, called with surprising news. Ben was more confident at school, more willing to share ideas. Clara hung up, feeling a mixture of pride in Ben's resilience and sadness that it took such a painful experience for his growth. A few days later, an unexpected handwritten letter arrived from Aunt Carol, sincerely apologizing for her silence and acknowledging the Thorne family's pattern of criticism. She supported Clara's boundaries and was working on her own. Clara read the letter to Ben, who sagely remarked that Aunt Carol might be the bravest grown-up besides his mom, because it was hard to admit being wrong. The following weekend, Clara made a difficult decision. After consulting with Dr. Reed, she drafted a clear, firm email to her parents outlining boundaries. Rebuilding a relationship required acknowledgement of harm, commitment to respecting Ben, and agreement to family therapy. She sent it before losing her nerve, then took Ben to the park. While Ben was climbing, Clara received a text from an unknown number. It was from Mr. Jones, Ben's science teacher's husband, who ran the local robotics club. He mentioned Ben's interest and offered an opening in their Saturday morning club. That afternoon, Clara took Ben to meet Mr. Jones and see the club. Ben's transformation was immediate and beautiful. Surrounded by other children who shared his interests, he relaxed, smiled easily, and his eyes lit up. He excitedly asked to join, and Clara agreed, feeling a weight lift from her heart. December arrived with no response from her parents, but a flurry of messages from Sarah. Clara finally agreed to meet her for coffee. At the upscale cafe, Sarah complained about the family chaos Clara had caused, mentioning Eleanor's distress and Richard's rage, and predicting a Christmas disaster. Clara sincerely stated her regret for their struggle, but affirmed her choice to protect her son. Sarah accused her of being dramatic, calling it harmless teasing and saying Ben needed thicker skin. Clara asked if she would say the same if it were Chloe or Daniel being mocked. Sarah claimed it was different because her children fit the mold, did not challenge comfort zones, and knew their place. The phrase "their place" struck Clara. She countered that children were meant to be loved and encouraged to become themselves. Sarah scoffed, clinging to traditional values and respect for elders. Clara insisted respect should be mutual and love unconditional. Their conversation went in circles, neither truly hearing the other. As Clara drove home, she realized something had shifted. She felt secure in her convictions, no longer diminished or defensive after an encounter with Sarah. 2 weeks before Christmas, holiday cards arrived. Among them, a thick envelope from her parents containing a standard card with an old family photo and a $500 check for Ben, with no note. Clara returned it the next day with a brief note stating they needed acceptance and respect, not financial support. That evening, Ben came home bursting with news. His robotics team qualified for the regional competition. His excitement was contagious. They celebrated with pizza and ice cream. Watching him animatedly chatter about circuit boards, Clara knew protecting his spirit was worth any family fallout. Christmas approached, and for the first time, Clara would not spend it at her parents' house. This brought both sadness and liberation. Ben and Clara decided to create their own traditions. They decorated a small tree with homemade ornaments, planned a special Christmas Eve dinner, and arranged to volunteer at the animal shelter on Christmas morning. Ben declared it would be the best Christmas ever, hanging a robot ornament on their tree. Clara silently vowed to make it so. 2 days before Christmas, Eleanor called with trepidation, informing Clara of Richard's minor heart episode, attributing it to stress. Clara inquired about his health. Eleanor then invited Clara and Ben to Christmas, stating it would mean a lot to Richard. The old guilt began to creep in, but Clara remembered Dr. Reed's warnings about emotional manipulation. She carefully expressed sorrow for Richard's scare, but maintained their boundaries. She asked if Richard had read her email and was willing to acknowledge his behavior. Eleanor sighed with disappointment, asking if it was the time for ultimatums. Clara clarified it was a boundary, not an ultimatum. Eleanor warned that the boundary might cost her relationship with Richard. The question hung in the air. Was that what she wanted? Clara knew she wanted loving parents for Ben, but not at the cost of his self-worth. She wanted Richard to get well and for both of them to consider if a relationship with their grandson was worth examining their own behavior. After hanging up, Clara sat in the quiet apartment, feeling the heavy weight of family expectations, but for the first time, strong enough to carry it without buckling. 3 months after the Thanksgiving incident, Ben stood nervously beside his science fair display at Willow Creek Elementary. His upgraded robot sat proudly on the table, surrounded by charts. The judges made their way through the exhibits. Clara whispered encouragement, telling him she was proud. Ben nodded, took a deep breath, and explained his project with newfound confidence. He answered questions thoughtfully and demonstrated his robot. That afternoon, Ben's name was called for first place in engineering. The smile that broke across his face as he accepted his trophy was worth every difficult moment. He ran to Clara, exclaiming his achievement, and she hugged him. As they packed up, Clara reflected on their journey. The changes in Ben were remarkable. He stood taller, spoke more confidently, and seemed comfortable in his own skin. Their relationship with her parents remained complicated. After Richard's health scare, Clara had sent flowers and called for updates, maintaining caring contact while upholding boundaries, a delicate balance. 2 weeks after the science fair, Eleanor called Clara, her voice hesitant. She said she and Richard had been thinking and wanted to see Ben's robot demonstration if it was still an option. Ben had mentioned wanting to show them, but Clara had not extended an invitation. Eleanor's slight revision of history was typical, but Clara focused on the opportunity. She said she would check with Ben. That evening, Ben's reaction surprised her. He wanted them to come but did not want them to say mean things again. Clara promised to ensure they understood. The following Saturday, her parents arrived. Richard looked thinner, his commanding presence diminished. Eleanor carried a gift bag. Richard formally thanked Clara for having them. Ben emerged with his robot. Eleanor stepped forward, offering a sophisticated robotics kit, which Ben genuinely appreciated despite his weariness. Richard expressed interest in Ben's science fair win and asked to see the project. Ben glanced at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. He set up his robot and began explaining it. Clara watched her parents closely, but something had shifted. They listened attentively, asked appropriate questions, and Richard even looked impressed during the demonstration. He praised Ben's engineering and hard work, and Eleanor added that he should be proud. Ben affirmed his work, mentioning Mr. Jones's help with programming, but asserting he designed and built it himself. The visit continued with cautious conversation, like people trying to find common ground. Before they left, Richard asked to speak with Clara privately in the kitchen. He cleared his throat, uncomfortably. He admitted he had been seeing a doctor for emotional issues, suggested after his heart episode to help with stress. Clara was stunned. Richard, who thought therapy was for the weak, was in therapy. He continued, saying the doctor told him he had rigid thinking patterns and that his generation suppressed emotions. He found it new age, but confessed he did not want to lose his relationship with Clara and Ben. It was not an apology, but an extraordinary concession. Clara carefully said it meant a lot to hear and asked if he would be open to a family session with her and Ben. He stiffly nodded, agreeing if that was what it took. After her parents left, Ben asked if they were truly changing. Clara honestly replied they were trying and that it was a start, but real change took time and effort. Ben drew an analogy to programming a robot and Clara agreed. She assured him they could take it slow. Over the next month, they began the careful work of rebuilding family relationships on new terms. Eleanor called regularly with genuine questions about Ben's activities. Richard attended his therapy sessions and even agreed to a family session, though he remained stiff and spoke little. Sarah remained distant, uncomfortable with the shifting family dynamics that challenged her worldview. But Uncle John became a more regular presence, taking Ben to robotics competitions and offering unconditional support. In late April, Ben's robotics team qualified for the state competition. Clara mentioned it to Eleanor, who immediately expressed a desire to attend if Ben was agreeable. The competition was 2 hours away. Ben was a bundle of nerves and excitement. Clara scanned the audience, not expecting her parents, but they were there, sitting awkwardly. Eleanor waved tentatively. Clara pointed them out to Ben, who took a deep breath and asked if he could say hi. Clara agreed. She watched as he walked over to them. Richard, after a moment's hesitation, gently placed his hand on Ben's shoulder, a touch of support. Eleanor actually hugged him, a rare sight. Ben returned to his team. His team placed third, but as they gathered afterward, Clara realized they had all won something more important. "I've been thinking," Ben said as they drove home, his parents following in their car to join them for dinner, about what happened at Thanksgiving and everything since then. Clara asked him what he had been thinking. He said it was okay to love someone but not accept how they treated you, and that people could change if given a chance, but you did not have to endure hurt while waiting. Tears pricked Clara's eyes at his wisdom. She affirmed his understanding of boundaries. Ben then thanked his mom for standing up for him, saying it helped him learn to stand up for himself. In that moment, Clara understood the profound truth. Standing up for children protects them in the moment and teaches them to protect themselves for a lifetime. That night, the journey was not over. Her parents still struggled with old habits. Sarah remained resistant to change. But they were moving forward on a foundation of mutual respect, not fear or obligation. As parents, we often teach children about the world. But sometimes the most important lessons come when they watch us navigate it, when they see us set boundaries, demand respect, and choose authentic relationships. 6 months after the state robotics competition, Ben's newfound confidence blossomed. He was thriving in school, his robot designs winning local accolades, and his quiet determination had even earned him the respect of Daniel, his cousin, who now sometimes asked for help with his own science projects. Clara's life, too, had settled into a rhythm of peace. Her parents, especially Richard, continued their therapy, and while their relationship with Clara was still a work in progress, the venom of their criticism had largely receded. They were learning, slowly, imperfectly, to respect Ben's unique spirit. One humid afternoon in July, an unmarked envelope arrived at Clara's apartment. Inside, not a letter or a bill, but a single, brittle photograph. It was an old picture, faded at the edges, of a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, standing proudly beside a gleaming, intricate machine. The machine was unmistakably an early model robot, far more complex than anything Clara had ever seen her father build. The young man in the photo, though with a different haircut and style, had the exact intense gaze and slight, almost hidden, smile that Ben often wore when immersed in his own creations. And then Clara looked closer, her breath catching in her throat. Across the bottom, in small, elegant handwriting, were 2 words, "For David." Clara knew that handwriting. It was her father's. A cold dread, mixed with a shocking new understanding, washed over her. David, Ben's father, had never been good with his hands. He was an architect, yes, but more an artist with buildings than a builder of intricate machines. He hadn't just lost his job at the architectural firm years ago. He'd been given a rare and prestigious opportunity to work on a specialized design team, a project that required strict secrecy and absolute dedication. And David had always spoken of his father's firm with a quiet pride, a different kind of pride than the one he'd shown for his own work. The photo clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. The truth wasn't that David had been overwhelmed by providing for his family. The truth was far more complex and devastating. Richard Thorne hadn't just disapproved of Clara's marriage to David. He had, years ago, subtly manipulated David's career path, steering him towards a job opportunity in Seattle that was, in fact, a clandestine project for a defense contractor, a project Richard had a vested interest in. Perhaps even a secret stake in its success. The pressure of providing for his family hadn't crushed David. It was the intense, isolating demands of the secret project, combined with Richard's constant, overbearing influence, that had slowly eroded David's spirit and his connection to his own family. Richard hadn't just been a critical father-in-law. He had actively engineered David's departure, pulling strings in the background to ensure his own vision for their family line, a line of conventional success and influence, remained untainted by Clara's dreamer nature or Ben's sensitive spirit. The abandonment wasn't David's choice alone, it had been Richard's long game. The photograph was not a random relic, it was a deliberate act. The handwriting, Richard's, was not just a dedication but a signature, a final, cold confession. He had sent it. He had sent this picture, now after all these months of change, perhaps as a final assertion of control, a twisted message that he still held the ultimate power over their lives, that their newfound peace was merely a fragile illusion built on his terms. He wasn't changing for them, he was changing to regain proximity, to reassert influence. The realization hit Clara like a physical blow. The path to healing, she now understood, was far more treacherous than she could have ever imagined. The battle for Ben's self-worth had just taken a far darker turn.